everyone, I'm Hugo.
And I'm Jake.
And this is the Bible Reloaded.
Yes, and today we are doing another review of a movie, and it was one that was requested all over the place.
And I see why. This might be the worst movie we've done so far in...
As far as, like, apologetics, worse than God's Not Dead, in my opinion.
Worse, yeah, I'd say so, and it's worse than Persecuted, because while Persecuted is called Persecuted, this movie had more of a persecution complex somehow.
But yeah, so it's Expelled.
Intelligence Not Allowed by Ben Stein. You know the guy from Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Also wrote Nixon speeches? That guy.
You know, Bueller.
He's so interesting in that film. Let's see what he has to say about intelligent design, or as I like to call it, creationism. So, I had seen this movie a long time ago, like, before I had become an atheist. This was when I was right on the cusp of stopping being religious.
Yeah, and I had not.
And this was about the time Religulous came out, too, so I'd watched Religulous, and I watched this because I thought to myself, in fairness, I better give them both time.
Right.
It's been a long time, though, so I didn't quite remember this movie. So sitting down, I didn't remember that when the movie starts, you get images of Nazis and communist Russia,
right?
And then a little bit of Berlin when it's divided.
Right from the start, you're getting propaganda. Right away, they're trying to sway you and appeals to fear, and they're trying to get you thinking, oh, Nazis are bad. Berlin Wall, that sucked, right? And then so you have a negative outlook, and then they start hitting you with, they won't let us do freedom stuff. And Ben Stein has a speech, and it's really somber. And it kind of reminds me of the beginning of Persecuted, honestly.
A little bit. They have the same problem of showing then, like, national landmarks and, like, ooh, yeah. America, 1776, do-do-do, I'm Ben Stein. So he has this whole speech about America was founded on freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, all that jazz, which I agree with, but the way he's using it in this movie is incorrect, but we'll get to that more as he talks about it later. He says in the speech, in scientific pursuits, in scientific institutions, we're losing our freedom of speech.
No.
And his reasoning is because people who are proponents of intelligent design, which if you don't know is basically creationism, but less religious overtly, let's say, he's saying that people who are proponents of intelligent design don't have a voice in science, and he's saying because of that, freedom of speech is in jeopardy in scientific institutions.
That is so just logically inconsistent. The freedom of speech is what allowed them to talk about intelligent design, and just because people disagree with them does not mean, in fact, that their freedom of speech was denied. What it means is they're fucking wrong, and the scientific community doesn't recognize intelligent design or veiled creationism as a scientific practice, because guess what? There's no fucking science in it. You can't, it's really hard to force science into a thing where there is none, and therefore the science community is like, well, that paper sucks.
They basically want the right to say that what they believe is correct without evidence, and then they don't want to be criticized for it. They want their beliefs to be pushed ahead and be a competitive theory with evolution without any of the data to back it up. And here we get into a section of the movie which I will call the section where they talk to the Expelled.
Yeah, and
these are various people in academic, I'll call it academic positions, who believe that they have been slighted or fired or wronged because of their intelligent design views. But when you look into the claims of these people further, you find that they really don't stand up. And the reasons that they say that they were fired or let go or whatever are not really the reasons they were. And we'll give you two examples. There are more in the movie, but if you want to learn more about these people and their claims, and then what actually happened, there's a website, I believe it's called Expelled Exposed, and I'll link in the comments. Really great website, and if you watch this film, keep this website up while you do so, because they have claims and what actually happened, and they have resources to back up what they're saying. Very good website, great resource. So the first person
is Richard Sternberg, and he was a former editor of a scientific journal who published an intelligent design paper. In 2004, he was the editor of proceedings at the Biological Society of Washington, and he published his pro-intelligent design article.
The problem was, he was supposed to take this to higher-ups because he was an unpaid volunteer, basically. He was supposed to take this to higher-ups and make sure, hey, can I publish this article? He did not. And the article was rife with inaccuracies, and they say in the movie it was peer-reviewed, which is technically correct, but it was peer-reviewed and rejected by peers because it was bad science. He published it anyway, though, behind other people's backs, and that got him disciplined. In the movie, he says he got removed from the position. However, when you look into it further, it turns out he had put in his resignation from that position 6 months prior.
All it was you published a paper you weren't supposed to. You should not be doing that.
Yeah. And by the way, I would even say he wasn't technically fired, although he says he was. They make it seem like he was. Even if he was, for one, like we said, he published a paper he wasn't supposed to. But two, he's trying to further an agenda by doing so. That's not what a scientific journal is for. This isn't like Popular Science magazine. This is a scientific journal. There's rigor involved in choosing what gets published. That's what makes it a scientific journal and reputable. If anyone's just allowed to put anything out there, it ceases to be a scientific journal. And this is an old journal. They have a reputation to keep up. Anyways.
And during this talk of him saying, I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist, and he says these words, they intercut throughout his interview with, like, people fighting and other crazy shit, like some sort of battleground, and they keep making references to how it's like a huge fight in the science, but it's not. It's not. It's like Mike Tyson fighting, like, some grandma.
It's not even the same thing. Also, I think this is a good time to bring up how produced this documentary is.
It's
if anyone watches documentaries semi-regularly, at the very least, you know there's kind of a scale between documentaries that just turn on a camera and let things unfold.
I'd say Jesus Camp was pretty close to that.
That was pretty good. That's a good, they just kind of let stuff unfold. There was very little commentary. Yeah. On the other side, let's say we have a Michael Moore documentary, which is
very
heavily produced, and they clearly have a message, and they're trying to use the production to get things across. This movie is way more on the Michael Moore side, where you have someone trying to cram a message down your throat.
I think this is worse than Michael Moore.
I would agree, and they're using editing techniques to try and get this across. You can see this in the use of B-roll and the use of music, the ominous music when they're talking about evolution.
And you can see, like, whenever they have a proponent of evolution or just science in general, they'll be shot askew off to the side in the dark. And when they're talking to someone that's on their side, which would be ID, they're usually head-on, well-lit. It's not askew or weird. It's very warm, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond that, too. You'll notice in the movie, when someone like Richard Dawkins is speaking, everything he says, he gets maybe one sentence out because there's a hard cut. Because they're taking everything they say out of context and they're trying to form a narrative. However, when you talk about the intelligent design people, they get long talks. They get to get their point across without any edits. And you can also tell Ben Stein does something, I almost commend him for this because it's brilliant as I would borderline say a propagandist. You know what I mean?
It's very propagandist.
As someone who's trying to cram a message, it's brilliant. He turns himself into a straw man.
It's incredible.
He basically embodies someone on the fence about evolution and ID, or even an evolutionist, but the worst one ever, even though he's clearly, when making this documentary, already on the side of intelligent design. He makes the shittiest points that no one would ever make, and then allows the intelligent design people to answer his softball questions very eloquently, and it makes it look like, oh, the ID people, intelligent design people, have all the answers, and the people who are against this just have nothing to say. Ben Stein turned himself into a punching bag in order to get his actual message across, which he thinks is intelligent design is the way to go.
Right, but throughout this entire film, you'll get pseudo answers to the question. Assume this was a scientific approach. You could ask, say, Dawkins, why is evolution true? And he will give you, like, evidence. He'll be like, this is why we can see the allele change over time through speciation and blah, 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 natural selection. And then they don't ever make a pro-argument for intelligent design. They only make negative arguments for evolution, saying, well, there's holes and, you know, how can you have created life? But I mean, they continually do this thing where they reject the claims of evolution but never assert their own replacement for the argument that they reject.
Which I don't think is just a problem with the movie. I think that's a problem with the entire intelligent design / creationism camp. Yeah. It's all trying to tear down evolution without actually offering any answers in their department. They're not actually trying to put forward any evidence or data supporting what they believe. They're just trying to tear down evolution.
Yeah, and how science works is if you think something's wrong, you don't just go, that's wrong. You go, that's wrong, and here's why, because this doesn't corroborate with that, and now we have to test them both together to make sure that we get the right answer.
But that's not what ID people are trying to do.
Not at all.
The second Expelled let's say, person we're going to talk about is Professor Crocker, who claims she lost her job because she mentioned intelligent design in the class, and that was enough to get her fired. And Ben Stein is very on her side and like, that's ridiculous. However, when you look further into this, like the last claim, you find that she wasn't a tenured faculty at this college.
No, she was on a semester-by-semester contract, and they decided, due to performance, not to renew her contract.
Which is something that happens all the time.
Right.
Not only that, but she was also working at another college at the same time on a similar contract and continued to work at that college afterwards. Right. This was not the sort of job that she would expect to keep semester by semester. It might not have had anything to do with the intelligent design stuff to begin with. It could just be that that class wasn't needed anymore the next semester.
Right, and that happens. Sometimes you can't fill a class, or sometimes you have a tenured professor which can fill a spot, which they tend to try to work that out for them. And also, I mean, adjunct professors, anyone who knows anyone in teaching knows that until you get tenure, it's tough. It's real tough because you have to bounce around different schools and fill your schedule to try to pay the bills. And that's tough for her, and sucks that she lost her job, although she doesn't seem very adept at it. But it happens. It's expected. I'm sure that's not the first time that she's been discharged.
No.
And if it was, I'm very surprised. She's had very good run of luck until that moment.
I'd also like to say that even if it did have entirely to do with the intelligent design comment she made, that's
a biology
fine.
Professor.
You're a biology professor. You should be held to a standard at which you're teaching biology to these students. Intelligent design, whether you believe it or not, as an individual, as a biology professor, you have the responsibility of teaching these people biology as it is understood by the scientific community, because that's the nature of the class. That's what these people are paying for. When you, on the other hand, try and teach your personal beliefs, you're not doing your job, and it probably reflected in your reviews when these people finished the class. So you probably got fired because you're not teaching biology, which is your job. Now, if that's not enough, here's a more literal example. Let's say you're a geology professor, and you say, okay, class, today I'm going to teach you why plate tectonics is bullshit. You're going to get fired because you're not teaching the class that you're hired to teach.
Really, the only time you can bring up counter-arguments like that without evidence, real evidence as far as like empirical evidence, is like a philosophy or religions class where you can just basically talk it out.
Yeah.
But this isn't something you talk out. This is something that you have to refute with hard evidence because it's a hard science.
Totally.
So you just can't be doing that kind of shit. You could bring it up. I think you could say, hey, who believes in intelligent design? Oh, cool. If you find any arguments for that, more than willing to happen, but in this classroom we're going to talk about evolution.
Yeah.
Like you can address it, but you can't teach it, and that's what she was doing. So,
not only that, but after this documentary, she got a job at an organization that does speeches and talks about intelligent design, and now all she does for a living is giving presentations on why intelligent design she thinks is correct, which tells me that, as a teacher, she wasn't just mentioning intelligent design. If she knows enough to make entire presentations to churches and Christian colleges, she probably was teaching it primarily.
And that's fine. If that's your prerogative, that's cool, but if you should not be surprised to get shut out from a secular institution if that's the case, because you're giving a religious argument. So I don't see why you're butthurt about that sort of thing.
I can tell you right now, if I were going to a college and I was taking a biology class, which I was paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for, depending on the institution, and they were trying to teach me intelligent design or anything that was not pertinent to the course, I would complain and I would try and get them removed from their position, because I'm not paying money for an education when they're going to teach me bullshit. That's just my opinion, and I assume the opinion of the people who took her class based upon what happened. So then the movie has a couple other, like 3 or 4 other people who are among these expelled, and they all have very similar stories that can all be easily refuted. As we said earlier, that website, Expelled Exposed, has all their stories and refutations of those stories. We would go through all of them, but they're all very similar and we just don't have the time. So please, I really recommend this website. It's an excellent resource. Go check that out. Moving on, though. So, after this happens, Stein decides to go to the Discovery Institute, and if you don't know what that is, it's a proponent of intelligent design in the classroom and in the scientific community.
And he's walking around, where's it located, like Philadelphia?
I think it's in Philadelphia, some city.
He's walking around and he's like, I'm lost, I don't know where it's at, where is it at? Expecting this humongous building, and then he ends up getting to it and walking up, and it's like just on the 8th floor, and that's the only floor they have, and he seems aghast at the fact that the Discovery Institute, which barely anyone's heard of, is relegated to a single floor.
And the intention behind this is that he's saying, well, they're such a small building, how could they possibly pose any threat to the scientific community? A, they don't. B, just because they're in a small building doesn't mean they don't make loud noises. The Discovery Institute and institutions like them continue to try and put intelligent design in the classroom. Now, don't get me wrong, do I think they're going to succeed at a nationwide level? No, but that doesn't mean they're not annoying, let's say.
Right.
I mean, they're trying to teach non-science in a scientific community, and it has nothing to do with how big their office space is. So he then talks to the head of the Discovery Institute, or at least this office.
Seems like a nice guy.
He seems like a nice guy, but again, well lit. And the guy says, hey, we're the rational people. We just want to have an open discussion and debate evolution versus intelligent design. Which would be an okay thing to say, and I would agree with if it were 150 years ago, but the fact is it isn't, and the debate over evolution has been going on since then. The jury is in. Evolution has been peer-reviewed thousands and thousands of times. Every piece of information we have found corroborates it. I'm all for discussion and debate in the scientific community, because that's what makes science work, is the scrutiny. But the fact is, evolution, as a concept, the fact that all species on the planet have a common ancestor and everything's happened from mutation and all that stuff that you all know about, that's a fact. Yeah. It's something that all the data shows to be true, and if any piece of information showed the opposite, that'd be a huge deal, and it would be worthy of discussing. But the fact is, the people in the intelligent design camp haven't brought anything new to the table since 150 years ago, and the arguments haven't changed.
And this is a good time to bring up their sticking point, and they keep calling it Darwinian evolution, which is correct, but they're attacking Darwin specifically, who, again, was in the 1800s. Lots of things have changed since Darwin was in charge of that.
They actually have one point in the movie where this guy says, well, Newton used to be the only guy in physics, but then all this new stuff came out, and then there was Einstein and Stephen Hawking, which I assume those are the only three physicists that guy knows anyway. He says, so why is Darwin the only name in evolution?
It's not
He's
true.
not.
And then
Darwin is not.
And then they interview Dawkins like several times in this film.
And the idea of evolution gained prominence from Charles Darwin, but the fact is, 150 years of research have shown that it continues to be true.
And he was wrong about a lot of stuff.
He was wrong about a lot of stuff.
And then they use quotes like saying, like, oh, Darwin was racist. Probably. 1800s.
Totally.
Probably a terrible person in as far as social things are concerned. Although he was pretty nice to his local church. He matriculated from Christ College, and he gave a lot of money to them and stuff. And he was probably a social Christian. I don't know if he was practicing. He seemed to be agnostic openly. Probably an atheist. But, he's probably racist. I mean, there's just...
I couldn't have a conversation with Charles Darwin. It'd be interesting, but he'd probably be an asshole because, 1850s. But the fact is, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't get along with Newton either, but that doesn't make him wrong.
Yeah, what's your fucking equivocation here? He had a character trait. It doesn't change anything about the discovery.
The problem is that this movie goes into a lot of those fallacies, like they try and attack individuals and stuff. And the thing is, Ben Stein graduated from Yale Law School. He knows how to form an argument, and he knows how to tear them apart. So he knows what he's doing. There's no way he doesn't know that he's making fallacies. He just thinks that those are the most effective ways to sway people who don't know what he's doing.
And that's what you do with a jury of peers. You do use fallacy a lot. You do appeal to emotion. You use propaganda. And by the way, propaganda in a non-wartime colloquialism is anything that is supposed to support your argument, but it doesn't really provide any evidence. It's just an appeal to fear, emotion, stuff like that, or using like buzzwords. That's all propaganda. So I mean, it's not as negative as it sounds. Although in this case, he's wielding it mightily.
So now he talks to another intelligent design proponent who was actually the guy who wrote the paper that got the guy supposedly fired, even though he didn't get fired. And the guy says, the thing about evolution and intelligent design is that it's all political. Evolution is trying to push this political movement, and I wonder what political movement
what
is he
political about it?
What's political about evolution? I can see what's political about intelligent design. It's religious in nature. I get that.
That violates the Establishment Clause. If you don't provide scientific evidence for it, it becomes non-secular.
But evolution is... what's political about that? this is also a good time to point out that these people try and claim that intelligent design is not creationism and vice versa.
I have heard that so much. And while I can understand how some people can use intelligent design as to say, like, old Earth creationism, basically, it's still creationism. You're still saying that there is a creator that was the catalyst for everything. And usually, not always, but usually, it's the Abrahamic God, and also more common, either the Christian or the Islamic one. Rarely the Jews. I'm very surprised. Ben Stein, he self-identifies as a Jew, so it's very actually surprising to see a Jewish guy support this, because you don't see that very often. But usually it's the Christian God being said, yeah, I created everything, which is a creation, which makes you a creationist.
So we have a montage then of a couple of these people that we've already been introduced to trying to poke holes in evolution, and some of the things they say are, they say that they feel evolution is faulty and doesn't answer any questions. They never elaborate on what questions they want it to answer. I'm assuming they probably mean questions of meaning, why, but the fact is, evolution isn't trying to answer those questions. Evolution is trying to explain what happens and how we got to the point we are now with the variety of life on the planet. If you're looking for questions of meaning, you're going to want to go to a philosophy area.
And also, they seem to have an issue with the fact that evolution doesn't try to explain the origin of life. And they bring that up quite plainly, say, well, it doesn't? And they're like, no. And they talk to some scientists and stuff, and they give him alternate theories, and he just shits on them. The problem is they edit around, and it just sounds like a guy saying, stuff grows on crystals.
Yeah, that was a bummer, because that guy's actually trying to explain. The problem is they're confusing evolution, which is what happens after life already exists, with abiogenesis or panspermia, and those things are separate.
And they pick the two worst counter arguments. The first one they pick is directed panspermia, which would be aliens seeding the planet, which, by the way, I don't think that's entirely absurd necessarily in theory, but I do as far as evidence is concerned. And then he and Ben Stein has a thing where he just looks and goes, aliens? Yes, of course aliens.
That's a problem, too, especially when we talk about the crystal guy who he talks about. They make it sound like he's like a new age crystal healer person. No. When he's talking about life appearing on the bags of crystals, he's talking about the fact that the chemical compounds that create crystals may be involved in...
Carbon, very important.
Yeah, may be involved in the creation of the first protein strands in life. But Stein frames it as if it's this magical thing, and it's not. And Stein actually has a line where he says, I don't know how we go from mud to living things. The thing about intelligent design people is that they seem to have a different idea of life than what science tells us life is. They seem to think that life is this magical thing that exists outside of physical means, and it's not. I think it's because they're sort of dualist in that sense. They think that there's a soul and a body. Yeah. But what we know about life is just made of simple compounds. Life is anything in organic chemistry. You take those things apart, and they're just chemicals. You put them together in the right way, they're life. Especially the first life form would be incredibly simple, and the problem in this movie is that they equivocate very simple life today to very simple life at the beginning of life. The simplest life today is leaps and bounds more complex than the first life form.
You see a lot of organelles. I mean, you see some very simple life out there, don't get me wrong, but it's far more advanced and has usually locomotion, some way to sense light, a way to eat, a way to split efficiently, mitosis and all that stuff. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make sense if you know anything about the basics of evolution, or not even evolution, just biology. You should be able to see, oh yeah, that's why I'm wrong. I mean, I get why I'm incorrect in this instance, and then move on. But they don't. They just keep boarding up their doors and windows, hoping to reinforce their echo chamber.
This kind of comes to a head, too, when Stein is told to watch this documentary about abiogenesis, which, if you don't know, is literal definition is life from non-life, but it's what we consider the moment at which the first life form comes into existence. And in the documentary, they say, well, there were these compounds, there were these chemicals which make up life, and then there was some energy, and then it created life. And Stein pauses the movie and says, like, wait a minute, did they just say some energy? And then he makes a whole big deal because we don't know what the process was that went from organic compounds to life. And Stein treats this as though the entire thing is bullshit. And you know what, Ben Stein? It might be, but we're not saying that abiogenesis is a fact like evolution is. Abiogenesis, while it is the leading hypothesis in the biology community...
As far as life on Earth is concerned.
Correct. It by no means is a solid... It's not a theory. It's not the theory of abiogenesis that is a fact like evolution
like
is.
A hypothesis.
It's a hypothesis that is yet to be proven through tests, because it's a hard thing to test, and maybe someday it'll be proven right or wrong or whatever, but that's not the point. You're trying to say because we don't know for a fact abiogenesis is true, and we can't show it on paper, that somehow means evolution is not true. That's akin to saying abiogenesis is not proven, therefore gravity is not true.
Yeah.
You're two different things. And I certainly see what you're saying. They're related. It's about life, and one's about life. But evolution has nothing to do with where life, the first life, came from.
Evolution
it's about
happens after abiogenesis starts.
Absolutely. It's about what happens when you put life into an environment and it competes and mutates.
And frankly, there's been, 4.5 billion years or something like that for it to happen.
This is where they get into the odds, which really bugs me because creationists, intelligent design people often bring up the odds, which tells me they not only know nothing about evolution, they don't really know how math works, because they say that the odds of life spontaneously happening on Earth are like hitting the jackpot on 200 slot machines one after another. But the fact is, that's untrue. They made up that number. Do you know why? Because odds are calculated by saying the number of possible times something can happen, let's say the correct way, versus the number
in a period of time.
Yes, versus the number of times it can go the incorrect way, let's say. But you don't have any of those numbers when you're making that calculation. You have no idea how many times life could have or could not have occurred, because all you know is it at least happened once. You need numbers to calculate odds like that. The creationists like to throw out numbers like a trillion, 1 in a trillion, trillion, but they have no math to show, because any numbers they make up are speculative at best.
But even if the numbers were like that, we hit it.
There you go.
Here we are. I mean, you can't say, like, oh, this is so impossible. It happened.
Something happened for sure.
Yeah, no matter what. Even if it was intelligent design, you don't know to what capacity that intelligence was. And that's why the directed panspermia was a little scoffed at. But that's also intelligent design, technically.
Yeah.
Because it's pointed design.
But the problem is with that, it's not Jesus, which apparently is a problem for certain intelligent
Jesus
design
was a
people.
carpenter. He did not know biology.
They also bring into question evolution because they think it's not evidenced enough. They say, and I quote, Darwinian theory is a mess because it's too general, unlike math. And this is, again, a statement that only makes sense if you don't know anything about math or biology. Math is the most precise science there is, because math can be proven. You can have proofs in math. You can say, here are my calculations, reverse them if you need to, here's why it's right. Mm-hmm. Anything beyond that gets away from the preciseness of math. Beyond math, there's physics, which uses a lot of math, and you can use calculations, and it's pretty right, because generally you can look at the calculations, but you're still using that to interpret things. So
and there's moving parts which can change the thing.
Yeah. But moving further away from that, you get different studies that are less and less precise, but they might still use math, but they're less precise. Then you get to a biology, which is not a lot of math. You can certainly use mathematical models to predict things in biology, especially when you're talking about populations and stuff. Yeah. But biology is not mathematics. No. You are never going to get the preciseness of math in biology unless somehow some sort of new math was created.
It'd have to be on the genomic and DNA level for that to even be a possibility. I mean, it'd have to be some new crazy discovery and we can, like, calculate the path. You'd have to, for that to be as accurate, you'd have to both be able to, from one sample, predict what happened in the past and what will happen in the future under any given circumstance with that biology, which is just impossible because mutations exist.
When you're comparing any study to math, it's going to pale in comparison in the amount of proof you can have, because the only study in which you can actually have the literal definition of proof is math. Biology is about evidence, and we have the evidence for evolution. It's as simple as that.
But they keep going on and they nitpick, and they're like, well, we don't even know what a species is. See, that's the thing. Species colloquially means a lot different to us than it does to the scientific community, which has a pretty good grasp on it, but because it's biology and it's in flux a lot, it is hard to nail down, but it's not incorrect.
No, species in science is a taxonomic classification. You probably remember this from high school science. You have
kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
Yeah,
and then there's the subgenus and all this shit, but That's how you remember it.
But basically, the most general definition of species that you can have is it's any group that can breed together and make fertile offspring. So cats can breed, and then those cats that they have can breed, and that's a species in the most general term. But the fact is, when you're talking about science, it's very hard, and this is actually in biology called the species problem, and it's something that's debated amongst the community and they have to deal with. It's essentially saying a good definition for species that applies to bacteria might not be the same for birds or cats or a different life form. Life is so varied that when you try and define something as like a species, things don't always fall into line, because species is just a way we're trying to describe the world around us, and nature doesn't fit into little boxes like that. It doesn't fit into nice little boxed definitions. There are gray areas. So when you're talking about species in biology, you need to take into account the context of the situation. So when you're talking about this species of cat, you might have a different definition for species than you would for a species of gnat or bacteria or whatever. But the fact is, that doesn't make it a faulty definition. It means that it's a definition that only has as much usefulness as we can get out of it, like anything. That's the nature of human language. It's flexible, and in science we're trying to do the best we can with the limits of our language. We get to him talking to Richard Dawkins, which, by the way, if you're wondering, why did they get so many scientists in this film talking about this if they knew this was going to be about creationism?
This is glorious.
Interesting story. The people they got, like Richard Dawkins, didn't know this was going to be about creationism. The emails they were sent said, hey, we're making a documentary called Crossroads, and it's going to be about evolution and people debating it. The email made it sound like it was a pro-evolution documentary.
Yep.
However, some of these people then saw their name in the poster for this movie called Expelled and were like, I don't remember doing an interview for this movie. Then to find out it was the interviews they did for that movie Expelled. The people who were in charge of the movie after the fact said, well, we changed the name. However, when you go back and look, it seems that 6 months prior to those interviews, and those emails had even been sent out, they had already taken the domain name expelled.com or something along the lines of that. So clearly they already knew the name long before they sent those emails. They were trying to be intentionally deceptive to try and get these people on and lend credibility to their documentary, which, good job, guys.
It worked.
So we get to the first Richard Dawkins interview, let's say, and they say, Richard Dawkins is an evolutionist, therefore he doesn't believe in God.
And while they say that, they're showing the God delusion, which, by the way, doesn't really talk about evolution that often.
He talks about it to an extent, but that's because that's his
he's
life.
A biologist.
He's a biologist. But the fact is, if you've ever read the book, you know that that's not really the only reason.
It's more about social memes and the interesting things humans do.
He actually does admit in the documentary, though, that that's part of what made him an atheist.
Sure.
But the fact is, that's an appeal to consequences. You're saying evolution shouldn't be true because then you're going to be an atheist, which that's not a reason not to believe in evolution.
Right.
That's a consequence. You know this, Ben Stein. You were a lawyer. Come on.
But again, Dawkins, if anyone knows about... He's not always the most eloquent guy when it comes to... or delicate. He's a very blunt man, so he comes across as an asshole. And while he may be an actual asshole, he comes across as more of an asshole than usual because of the way they edit and shoot his face.
That being said, I do like Richard Dawkins.
I do too.
He doesn't always go about things the best way. He's not as pragmatic as I like to think I am.
Hitchens was an asshole too, but he was charming about it, and he had scotch in his hand almost all the time, so it was like, Hitchens.
We then get the argument from complexity.
Yeah.
Because I've never heard that one before. And they talk about, hey, how did the new information get there? Which implies that they think that the only process that evolution works through is natural selection, and it's not. Evolution not only works through natural selection, mutation, gene drift, other things come into play. So, while you might say natural selection reduces the gene pool, mutation grows it. And then they might say, well, where's the information come from? It's because the Earth is in a closed system, the sun brings energy to the planet, plants grow, it allows cell division, which creates mutation, it's a whole thing. And they'll say, well, you can't just get information from nowhere. Well, again, you're using strategically elastic definitions of information. All DNA is, it's chemicals in certain orders. If you change the orders, that's different information. If you want to call that added information, feel free, but it's not really. It's just changes in chemical chains.
Yeah, it's kind of like having a find and replace in a Word document
You haven't really added new information,
but you've changed it so it means something a little bit different, and it will change the meaning of a sentence.
We then, with the design argument, get this, it's like a 1.5 minute long animation of the workings of a cell, showing how complex it is, and I agree, it's very complex. Good thing it took millions upon millions, if not billions of years to get there. I get it, it's complex, that's not an argument. We understand how these things came to be. It's a nice animation.
It was very beautiful. I'm just glad we didn't get a human eye thing, so we didn't have to talk about that.
That's a pain. And then they have one of the dumber lines in the movie. They say, this is a quote, again, I quote this directly because I want you to understand the level of dumb we're looking at in this movie. The cell is like nothing we've seen in the physical world. The cell is in the physical world. The cell is like nothing we've seen in the physical world other than the cell. The cell isn't magic. It isn't like...
The cell makes up all the things. We see a lot of them. There's a shit ton of cells, and they're all different. They're not unknown. They're abundant.
And then they kind of end that talk by saying, if the data backs intelligent design, why not support it? Because there is no... Not only does the data not support it, there is no data. Intelligent design has never had a peer-reviewed paper or a research study ever. Anyone out there, find me a study, a peer-reviewed study of intelligent design.
You might find really, really old ones, maybe, before evolution. You might find someone be like, God, things. And they're like, yeah, okay, chap.
But seriously, it's...
I can't imagine. I've never seen one. I've never once seen one, and I've been directed all around several debates when you ask for peer review articles on the subject. I've never been given one. So, and not peer reviewed like, yeah, it was given to peers, and then peers are like, that's stupid.
I mean, peer reviewed
and
then
put in like a journal.
Yeah. And that's one of the big problems with the whole documentary, is that they're essentially saying, why won't they let intelligent design be part of the scientific community? Because it isn't science. It has nothing to do, it's not a conspiracy, no one's trying to stop you. It's because you're wrong and you haven't provided data. Provide data that your position is correct, that your hypothesis has standing, and you will be included. You will not just be included, you will win lots of prize money, because science does that sort of thing when you make groundbreaking discoveries. And in doing so, they end up comparing the Institute of Science, which it's not like there's a fucking science building. Science is a practice.
The science building.
Science is a practice that's done everywhere in the world, a lot of the times in universities or private institutions.
All the way down, and it can be all the way down to the rudimentary level. Anytime you do trial and error, that's science. That's a scientific method, even though maybe you're dumb.
Yeah. But he compares the Institute of Science to Communist Russia / East Germany, which, again, appeals to emotion / consequence, and it's just despicable. And honestly, Ben Stein, you know better. What's wrong with you? You're padding this documentary with B-roll of shitty things that have happened in the past in the hopes that you're going to convince me, and you're not doing it. And again, he repeats himself by saying, why is the scientific establishment afraid of free speech? Two things. Firstly, free speech protects the government from punishing you from your free speech.
Right.
Two, you still have free speech, but that doesn't mean you can't be criticized for shitty ideas. Science is about criticism of ideas. The rigor of the scientific community is what allows science to work. If you just let anyone come in and say, I have a hypothesis, tell me I'm right, then science wouldn't work. Then it'd just be a bunch of people jerking each other off. That's not the point. It's hard to take hypotheses to the point of established science. It's supposed to be. That's the entire idea, is that it's so hard that when you do get an idea that turns out to be correct, it withstands all the scrutiny and becomes widely accepted. Things like evolution stood the test of time. They were highly scrutinized, and people didn't
still are.
And people didn't take it seriously at first.
Right.
But guess what? It's 150 years later, and it's now the established center of all biology.
Right.
Biology doesn't work without evolution.
And for the record, any single time that they do any sort of biological testing as to the evolutionary process for anything, whether it's comparing bones, comparing DNA, anything like that, they are de facto testing evolution again.
Because it all only works on the light of the assumption that evolution works.
So if they got a sample that didn't work, and they retested it and retested it and retested it, and it kept coming back negative, they'd do two things. First of all, they'd question, what the hell's going on, and this is not the expected result. And then they'd go, why? And then they'd find out, because that's how it works. They didn't just say, oh, evolution's false. They went, ooh, maybe there's more to it. Or maybe there's less to it. Or maybe we were wrong. But that's how it would work.
Interestingly, in the movie, they also have one point that they show a newswoman interviewing an intelligent design proponent and say, there's not a single peer-reviewed article supporting intelligent design. And then the intelligent design person says, yeah. And then the movie does nothing to correct that, which implies that the movie knows that there are no research papers out there that support intelligent design.
I don't even know why they do that, other than to try to use that as a like another nail in the proverbial coffin of we're persecuted. Is that what it is?
I think so. I think they're trying to say the reason there's no peer-reviewed articles is because they're trying to keep it out, even though, no, that's not the case.
The issue with that, though, is they keep harping on this free speech, and America is a land of freedom bullshit. Yes, that's correct. And as Hugo said earlier, just a few minutes ago, it's for the protection against the government. It's not for protection against institutions or private citizens or private corporations or anything like that. Duck Dynasty guy, great example, hates gay people, got in trouble for hating gay people because whatever channel they're on, TLC or something, doesn't stand by that. And as an employee, he got reprimanded. So getting fired for something that doesn't stand by the company motto or appeal, yes, it can get you fired and that kind of... so this is not... You're not persecuted.
No. And it comes from a misunderstanding of what science is. He's saying free speech as if it entitles them to not be criticized.
Yeah, but that's all science is
science
criticism.
Is criticism of bad ideas and trying to figure out why ideas work or don't work. And then...
Of course.
We get to the worst fallacy of all, which I think there's already a name for it, but I'll call it the Hitler fallacy.
I'm going to call it... Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Which is... He says that scientists think a world without religion would be perfect. A utopia. Which I don't know who would think that. I don't think that. Anyway, he says that what's a world without religion like? I know. Nazis. So then Ben Stein... Ben Stein takes the time to go to it's like a concentration camp / hospital where they sterilized and killed thousands of people, which is awful.
It was a Nazi hospital, not a hospital.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, a bad thing. So they basically drive home the point, eugenics was a thing, and if you don't know what eugenics is, it's basically artificial selection of humans to advance the, air quotes, race to a higher level, and to get rid of the undesirables, which would be cripples, people with diseases, anyone who you're racist against, gays, people who have mental disorders, stuff like that.
And the thing is, yes, the Nazis took part in that. Actually, in America, there was people who took part in that and sterilized the mentally ill, which is wrong. But saying that evolution is wrong because of eugenics is like saying atomic physics is wrong because of nuclear bombs. Just because people took their knowledge and turned it to bad things doesn't mean the knowledge is incorrect.
That's
Science and knowledge are tools, and human beings can do amazing things with knowledge, and they can also do terrible things with knowledge. So may have people like Hitler and proponents of eugenics looked at things like natural selection and been inspired? Maybe. I'm not saying they weren't. I'm saying that has nothing to do with the fact of evolution.
I mean,
you can look at... Who looks at Hitler and says he was right?
No,
very few.
Very few. Hardly anybody.
Look at Jake and I, for instance. Here's a sample size of 2, which is a terrible sample size, but let's say that. We both understand evolution well enough.
Yeah.
So Jake, is eugenics a good thing?
No. Eugenics is a bad thing.
I agree. Eugenics is a bad thing. What do you know? Neither of us are insane. And this is the worst kind of appeal to consequences because it trivializes an actual horrible historic event.
Yeah.
Especially Ben Stein being Jewish. How can you take something like the Holocaust and try and use it for political means to try and further your point?
It's not a fucking trump card.
It's the Holocaust, you asshole.
It was a bad thing.
Don't fucking treat it like it's
a chip you can play at the poker game of science.
It's ridiculous. And that goes on for about half an hour, by the way. We shortened this whole thing. The entire half an hour is basically him walking down the halls of this hospital.
He facepalms a few times.
Looking at the horrible imagery, looking at the ovens, and yes, the Holocaust is bad. We all agree. Stop trying to use emotions to say that evolution is wrong, because this has nothing to do with evolution.
As I said, rife with propaganda. He makes the worst slippery slope argument right after that. After all this Nazi bullshit and all the Holocaust imagery, he says, and this is a direct quote, "If Darwinism was used to justify atrocities in the past, could it be used to justify the same in the future?" Well, what about, like, Christianity and slavery? I mean, like, can we talk about that? Or, like, I wouldn't make a shitty argument like that in opposition to your God and the Bible and stuff I don't agree with. Why, what? It took me aback because I had always assumed that Ben Stein, intelligent guy, probably is. He's not smart in this instance. He's just not. And I think he's intentionally being disingenuous, so makes it worse.
So near the end of the movie, he tries to get into the Smithsonian, but again, with how produced this documentary is, they show up with these cameras, and then they have footage. If you've ever seen something like this, the security guards telling them to leave, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, you can't just show up with the Smithsonian with a filming crew and expect to film there, because, like anywhere, you need a permit. It's the fucking Smithsonian. Have you ever been there? It's super crowded and busy. If you want, I guarantee if Ben Stein had called enough in advance.
I've seen stuff from the inside of the Smithsonian before, so I don't understand how.
If he had called and said, "Hey, I'm making a documentary, can I come and film?" Especially because he's Ben Stein, he's a well-known person, they would have said, "Sure, let's set up a date and you can come and do whatever you need to do in this time slot. That's fine. It's the Smithsonian. It's a public institution. You're allowed to do that." But you can't just go in and do it. Clearly, the only reason he did this was because he wanted footage of getting kicked out of the Smithsonian, and he thinks like, "Ooh, look it, they don't want us in there. They're hiding the truth. Science, evil." Like, fuck you, Ben Stein. There's a bunch of school kids trying to go on fucking field trips learning science, and you won't even get a permit. Get a permit, Ben Stein, you ass.
So this is now the point where we're going to call it a showdown, I guess, for lack of a better term, between Ben Stein and Richard Dawkins. And, for your information, during all these interviews with the scientists who are pro-evolution, not the ones that are obviously ID, he's with them, but he had not been in the room with any of them. You had seen other interviews with Richard Dawkins, P.Z. Myers, etc., Dennett. Ben Stein wasn't the person talking to them. It was a producer the whole time. That's why you don't see Stein there directly in the same frame. But in this one, Stein is actually meeting with Dawkins, and they sit down together, and Stein shows up late, and he kind of brings it up. I don't know if he's proud of it or something, but, whatever. And they have this kind of talk, and Richard, if you ever seen him at the beginning of an interview, always seems like a nice guy. He's very cordial. Clearly, though, it's Richard Dawkins, and if you start talking shit, he's gonna be like, "No, you're wrong." And that's what happens.
Can I just say that I don't always agree with how Richard Dawkins goes about things, but Ben Stein is the biggest cunt in the universe in this interview. He's the biggest asshole. He kind of channels Bill O'Reilly and the fact that he doesn't,
a little bit.
He doesn't want the opposition to talk. He pesters Richard Dawkins, and he says,
a lot.
"How likely do you think it is that there isn't a God? Put a number on it." And Richard Dawkins continually is telling him, "I couldn't do that. That's not how it works. I don't think I could put a number on it. I don't have information to do that."
Right, because he's a scientist.
And Ben Stein is like, "No, just do it. And eventually, Richard Dawkins says something like 99%. And then Stein's like, "How could you possibly know that?" And it's like, Ben Stein, he just said he didn't have the numbers to justify it. But then you made him come up with a random number, and then you grilled him for not having numbers to back it up.
Dawkins says as much in the limited time they give him between edits, and he basically says, I'm not comfortable putting a number on it, but I could make it. It could be higher, it could be lower. It just depends on the evidence. But as far as your specific God, I don't really believe it.
And they continue talking for a while, and they talk about religion, and then Dawkins, when addressing the beginning of the universe, he talks about abiogenesis, and then he talks about panspermia, and then he talks about directed panspermia, which had been talked about earlier in the documentary.
Right.
And he talks about, well, it could have been some intelligent species that seeded life here, and
Sure.
Ben Stein acts as though he's shocked, even though they talked about it earlier in the documentary. He's like, "So it could have been intelligently designed, duh, duh, duh."
And he goes, "Yeah?"
And it's not a big deal. But Dawkins even says, even if it was, those creators, somewhere abiogenesis would have to occur. There has to be some point at which life originates. It just doesn't necessarily have to originate here. And Ben Stein takes this to mean that he wins, even though...
I guess.
Even with editing, Richard Dawkins, I think, comes out on top because you understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
He doesn't say anything contradictory. And then Stein, near the end, just continually asks why, over and over like an incessant child, because Dawkins is trying to explain the beginning of the universe, or at least the beginning of life, and Stein keeps going, why? How do you know that? What about this? What about that? And it gets to the point where Dawkins does what any intellectually honest person does. He says, I don't know. We don't know that. We don't know how that happened. We're still looking into it.
And he kind of scoffs, almost goes, you don't know? Like he's supposed to know all the things. It's just one guy.
Dawkins even says, it's not that I don't know, it's that no one knows. And Ben Stein takes this as if Richard Dawkins is wrong about everything. Ben Stein, it's okay to not know things, because the fact is we don't know everything and we're never going to know everything. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. The problem happens when you say, we don't know, therefore it must be intelligently designed. And that is why people in the scientific community don't take you seriously, because you don't offer solutions, you offer back doors so you don't have to answer questions.
Right.
You're trying to throw away questions by saying, I don't know, intelligent design, and then not backing it up with data.
And then at that point, he basically corners Dawkins as saying, like, so you could be wrong, and Dawkins honestly goes, yeah, I guess, it could be, probably not. And he reinforces the fact that he does not believe that he is wrong, but he leaves the possibility open because he's a scientist. He understands how this works. He could be wrong. And Ben Stein asks Dawkins what he would do if he died and saw God.
And Dawkins gives an answer that he pulls right from Bertrand Russell, which is, if I met God, I'd ask him, why did he keep himself so well hidden? And then Stein, in a voiceover, he doesn't directly address this to Dawkins, it's in a voiceover, he says, well, if God does exist, he would be hidden in the science, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what are you trying to make a point of, Stein?
Yeah.
You were correct. So why isn't there any information in the science that says that God exists?
And at this point, while watching the movie, we both looked at the TV and screamed the word, yes, in unison.
The problem with this whole talk with Richard Dawkins comes down to one of the other problems of intelligent design / creationism. They think that because scientists are unwilling to say, I'm 100% right all the time, yet they are,
right,
that means they win. Being more confident about something doesn't make you right. Saying, I believe something harder, doesn't make you right. It means you believe harder. The difference is scientists have data, but they're unwilling to say with 100% certainty, because they know nothing's 100% certain in science. That's why there's so much scrutiny. That's why intelligent design isn't talked about as much, because it has been scrutinized and it has been shown to be false. If you have new information, please come forward and win your Nobel Prize. Until then, Ben Stein, stop making shitty movies. So, the film ends with him finishing that speech, and he talks more about free speech because he's decided to frame this movie as if it's a free speech issue. It's not.
I get it, though. He's catering to pretty right-wing, probably older people who don't know a lot about the evolutionary science and who tend to be very conservative politically, and right now the political climate means they think that using words like free speech and gun rights make them a patriot.
And it ends with him essentially telling people, hey, just keep fighting for intelligent design, yo. I'm Ben Stein. And that's it.
And then he drops the mic and walks out. And then we're just sitting there like, well, that was a waste of an hour and a half. And now I'm angry.
So this movie is bad. This is one of the worst movies we've ever seen. This is the worst documentary by far, because the documentaries we've seen have generally been pretty accurate depictions of things without a lot of commentary. This documentary is one of the most pointed documentaries I've ever seen. It's produced with the intention of changing your mind.
Even in pre-production, it was produced. I mean, when you get to the point where you have to coerce people and trick people 6 months prior to the fact, come on. Like, you're clearly making a propaganda piece, and that's exactly what this is. And if I had to give it a rating, it would be a fucking 0.
It's definitely a 0. It's
It's
awful.
a 0 Ben Steins out of 10 Ben Steins.
However, I would say if you want a concise hour-and-a-half long summary of creationist arguments,
That's perfect.
watch this movie because it's excellent and it's a good practice if you want to try and
suppose.
formulate your responses. Also, that website I talked about earlier, Expelled Exposed, which again, in the comments, I'd link to it on the screen, but it doesn't let me go to external websites like that. Check in the comments. If you're going to watch the movie, keep this website open with it and kind of pause the movie as you go, read
Hilarious.
along. Very awesome. Very interesting to see how disingenuous this film was.
Right.
And god damn it, Ben Stein, it's not like I liked you a lot in the beginning,
But I hate you now.
but you just seem like the biggest douche in the universe.
Right. And it's not because he believes differently than me. It's because
Absolutely
he comes
not.
across as an asshole and a cunt and a,
And a liar.
and a
He's
liar.
lying.
Yeah, he seems... I would rather hang out with Bill O'Reilly
I
than
agree.
Ben Stein.
I agree. At least I feel like Bill O'Reilly would have good snacks.
Yeah.
He's gotta. Look at him. Anyway,
Like pigs in a blanket and scotch.
totes. So, with that said, thanks everyone for watching. If you want, you can always suggest movies in the comments. This was a suggestion. Very good suggestion.
Powerful suggestion, yes.
So, please suggest more in the comments. I think I have a couple saved, but it's always good to have more. If you want, you can follow us on Twitter at Bible Reloaded.
Or you could follow Hugo over there at Hugo Reloaded.
You can donate to our Patreon. We are very close to our $1,000 goal, which means we're going to start our Atheists Read the Quran series.
Yes, it'd be the Quran Reloaded. You can always subscribe. We got a little red clicky button there. It's really beautiful and, it's attractive. Makes you want to click. You're like a moth to a flame, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So, thanks everyone. I don't think Ben Stein will ever see this, but if you do, I'm very disappointed in you, and you don't deserve to be in John Hughes movies. So thanks everyone. Bueller. I wrote speeches for Nixon.
That's
True story.
Terrible.
And Ford. Anyway, until next time, I'm Hugo.
And I'm Ferris Bueller.
And this has been the Bible Reloaded.